Hi, everyone. I thought to create a quick sort of summary of the content, really the messaging that we had at our Cross Canada chapter tour for the spring of 2023. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors. In the case of Atlantic Canada, Echo Aviation, JSSI, and Initech Exec Air. In Quebec, JSSI, Echo Aviation, and CAE for hosting us in their facility. Ontario, I want to thank the team at Airbull and Columbia Aircraft Sales for bringing along a TBM 960. I want to thank a special thanks to Creos Aviation. Although not a formal chapter event, they hosted us in the boardroom, and we had a number of our members just talking locally about what are issues specific to, in this case, to the Saskatoon and Central Canada chapter. Last and not least, in Western Canada, to our sponsors, Lavero Aviation for bringing along a PC-12 and Honeywell for their sponsorship of the chapter tours in Edmonton, Calgary, and Vancouver. It's interesting, actually. This was my opportunity to get flying again. The last time I'd actually flown a PC-12 was 17 years ago. So this was not only World Pilots Day, but quick note: the trailing link landing gear still makes you look like a rock star. So thanks to the team again for that opportunity to sit up front. So let's get to a little bit about why you're here. And that was a fundamental question that I asked our chapter attendees. Why are you here? Or maybe as a viewer, why are you watching this video? In the case of the physical chapter attendance, perhaps it was to chat with the sponsors. Perhaps it was to network amongst your colleagues, to connect again, to see what's up with everyone. But what I would say is that you're here, you're watching this video, and our attendees that came out to the chapter meetings, they were there because you've got a passion for this industry. You understand that there is a part that you play, yes, certainly within the organization that you represent, but broadly speaking, the industry that we all work in, and you care. Now, before we get started, I want to tell you a story. Back when I led a flight department, a large Fortune 500 company's flight department, we were flying down to the United States, and our executive in the back, or the team that we had in the back, our CEO for the international business, he and I got into a conversation. And I just asked, how is it that you prepare for, how do you handle, what are some tips? In this case, for the investor call, how do you manage that? What are some best practices? And he had said it was really quite simple. You just need to manage people's expectations. And that's really where I want to start. As you are watching this, you're likely a member to the association. And broadly, there are two big buckets. The first is operators, people that fly aircraft. The second is the associates, the people that sell products or services to the operators. Now let's dive in a little bit on the operator side. In that bucket, I would say there are three pillars. There are three different operators. The first is the large charter management companies. Basically, if you're running a 704, 703 certificate, you are in that first bucket, a large charter, unscheduled commercial activity. The second operator category, it's those individual corporations that acquire these tools, these time machines for their business. So there's a reasonable expectation of profit. You are employed by that organization in one way or the other, but that aircraft exists, that time machine exists for that business. The third operator category would be our individually owned aircraft. So you're an individual, you've acquired an aircraft, and whether it's for requirements related to the PORD certification or otherwise, you choose to become a member of the association for the value, that voice that we can bring to the conversations and the issues that are present. So that's really the big buckets of the operators. And again, the associates are those in various categories, those FBOs, those training centers, those maintenance and repair facilities, those businesses that want to sell to the operators flying the aircraft. Now, why do I start there? When we talk about issues, the three that I want to kind of bring up today: luxury tax, airports and access, red tape. And when you think of it, especially amongst our operator category group, what good looks like can vary. You know, if you're a large operator, if you're a corporate owned asset, or if you're an individually owned and flown aircraft, what good looks like can be different. And why do I start here? On the matter of luxury tax, I think it's important to kind of go back and see what was the association active in doing and what are we continuing to do? In other words, the work on this issue is not done. It may be passed, but our efforts, that of the association, its staff, you, our members, and your voice, as well as the industry counterparts that we've worked with, our work continues on luxury tax. But let's rewind very quickly to this whole fight on luxury tax. We first faced it in 2015, and the association was successful in pushing it away. It resurfaced with the recent re-election, really 2019. It came back and really that's when it gathered more steam, more support, let's say, from the government of the day. And when you think of luxury tax, I think it's important to tell the story about how we came together with other colleagues, namely AIAC, other associations that are impacted by this, COPA, industry experts, so tax experts. You are members for your stories. And we were busy trying to tell the story of exactly how costly luxury tax would be to the industry. We managed to get the Parliamentary Budget Officer to agree that aircraft should be separate and studied on the luxury tax. We took that information, got unanimous consent from the Finance Committee to say that yes, aircraft should be separate and studied to measure the cost and the impact on passing this luxury tax. Remember, of course, that it's cars, boats, and airplanes. The government, after hearing from the PBO and after getting unanimous consent from the Finance Committee to separate aircraft and study them and at some point decide when they should be included in this luxury tax, the government decided to roll out luxury tax on the day they said they would roll out the luxury tax, which was, in this case, September 1st. Now, there's still, as I talked about just earlier, our work is not done. There's many efforts that we're undertaking, whether it's through the Committee of Scrutiny of Regulations, trying to address just structurally how something like this could get passed when the PBO, when unanimous MPs elected by Canadians forming this Finance Committee get unanimous consent to separate aircraft, and yet the government decides to just roll it forward. We were successful in a number of areas to expand, let's say, tolerance or widen the lanes on luxury tax. I think principally of the 90% exemption. This, if you go back to that example of our operator members, this is that corporate owned asset. So you're flying an aircraft better than 90% towards the business. It's got a reasonable expectation of profit. In that case, you're exempt from the luxury tax. So within that operator membership category group, you've got our efforts continue on the 703, 704 side, recognizing the way business aircraft are used in that realm. We were able to get a 90% exemption. We continue on the case of the individually owned to basically press for realistic limits to what this luxury tax is. So if we were to face it, we understand principally that this $100,000 doesn't work. I mean, you can't find an aircraft with wings and engines for less than $100,000. And so we put forth in multiple submissions recommendations related, one, to the 100,000 to 5 million in whole or in part. We've talked about its impact on our ability to leverage both the latest safety improvements, the latest environmental improvements. That's all what aircraft offer us. We've put forward recommendations related to the date of implementation, 2019. Our work with the Committee of Scrutiny of Regulations continues. And there's some very interesting paths that we're going to pursue in that realm. So really, the luxury tax is not done. It's here right now. But our job, and we're going to continue to work with our partners, colleagues, you, our members, to really reflect just exactly how costly this luxury tax is on the business aviation industry. And even when you look at some of the finance reports, it's really kind of laughable. I think they measured basically at the low side 10 to 20 jobs. We know that some of the largest manufacturers, and one being in Canada, have more of an impact than that. So our work and effort on luxury tax will continue. When it comes to the airports, specifically the four majors, reservation systems. We're seeing this in Toronto. We've seen this in Montreal. And if you're part of our airport committee group, specifically in those two locations, you participate on the calls with the airport authority. Now, a reminder that where we've been and where we are going, in the case of, say, Montreal, there was a point in time in 2019 when the airport authority completely banned business aviation movements. Of course, we acted in the benefit and the interest of the industry. We engaged in like letter campaigns to the board at ADM. We were able to then, as we fast forward, and here we are in 2023. Obviously, we have the recognition that business aviation needs movement, but when you really kind of think of it, the continued construction efforts, the impact of COVID, and then ultimately now that COVID is sort of passed behind us, the access that the airports have to capital means they need to and want to complete construction projects that they've had on the books. And this has put pressure on places like Montreal and Toronto, and as we'll soon discuss, Vancouver and ultimately Calgary. The association is absolutely working with the airport authorities in advance of these announcements. But the missing link is the continuation in the case of Vancouver and Calgary of UR operators. I think when we take an example or we look back at the experience we've had with Toronto Pearson, it can serve as the foundation for the relationship that we have with the various airport authorities. Specifically, based FBOs, based aircraft operators have early and preferential access to acquire these reservations. We're realistic about what does commercial on-time performance mean and how does that actually impact business aviation. So in the case of, like, say, Toronto or any one of the airports, but let's pick on Toronto in this example. If the airlines are running something like a 60% on-time performance, and that's being generous, that means that every hour where they say there are restrictions, there are commercial flights that are flowing into and out of those times. And that's why we've achieved some flexibility with respect to caps or limits on movements at these airports. It's recognizing that the system, which is, broadly both the airport authority, NAV Canada, and all air operators to that facility, need to interface. Obviously, we need to get to that same pavement. But how we use the terminal and the facilities and the airport varies. And that's how, in construction of these airport reservation programs, we're very active. So you're here because you care about this industry. And we need your support. If you're based in specifically any one of these the four majors, Vancouver, Calgary, Toronto, or Montreal, we need your support. We need your ideas. We're going to be standing up these committees in the case of Vancouver and Calgary. We do expect that both will have programs. In the case of Vancouver, we know, for example, that in 2024, they plan to take the entire north runway down. We've petitioned, we've asked for half the length, but apparently basically the underlay, the ground beneath the runway, needs quite a bit of work to bring it up to the standard that YVR needs. And as a result, they plan to take down the entire runway. And so this, in their eyes especially, necessitates the use of an airport reservation program to manage the flow at YVR. We're going to see ultimately the same in Calgary. And again, our work is not done, but we need your support in these areas. Let's go to the idea of red tape. And this also exposes some of the, when we talk about managing expectations in the various groups, what good looks like. So let's start with a couple things. So in terms of recent wins, if you remember CVR RIPS, the cockpit voice recorder independent power supply, the association petitioned, and we've carried this story that COVID has so impacted supply chains. Those supply chain impacts equal cost, and programs that were designed, let's say even in advance of COVID, need to be reviewed because the costs associated with either one, finding the equipment, buying the equipment, all of that has changed. And so that's the position we've taken with CVR RIPS. That was delayed. When you think of things like ADSB, and when you think of, again, what expectations look like, if you were that first operator category group, the 703, 704, large sort of commercial unscheduled charter operator, ADSB is, the issue of both safety and privacy isn't as apparent to you. Why? Because your aircraft are flying around the country. It's very difficult to determine who is in fact in the back of that aircraft, and so as a result, it's not going to make any media story about the movements of your aircraft. If, however, you are in the second and third, that is to say, you are a corporate aircraft operator or you're individually owned and flown, you very much care about ADS-B safety and privacy. For instance, we've told stories here in Ottawa, just how easy, for example, Flight Radar 24 makes, you've probably heard of this LAD, the Limited Aircraft Data Display Program. This this is a program that identifies, like the bar program where you can block the registration. This blocks or the desire is to let the flight providers know that your aircraft doesn't want to be tracked. But a group like Flight Radar 24 allows you with one click to identify all the airspace, all the aircraft above, say, North American airspace that have LAD designation. So in fact, it's just one click to find out all the aircraft that don't want to be tracked. Now, in this case, our work continues. We've identified with, for example, the Prime Minister's movements. We believe that more effort, we've petitioned NAV Canada on this, we've petitioned Transport Canada on this, up to including the Privy Council to identify the risks that a lack of movement on a plan to even just obscure hex codes needs to happen. Whether it's the Prime Minister's movements and tracking the challengers, it's very easy to find out where, in this case, the Prime Minister is flying. There's a threat assessment to that. We've put forth recommendations. For example, at Transport Canada, when you go to the Civil Aircraft Registry and you look up Charlie Golf whatever or Charlie Fox whatever, you'll see a hex code. That hex code allows you to just copy paste into Flight Radar 24 your registration, well, your tracking, your activity. And what we're asking is very simply, let's obscure that. Let's not make that. It isn't necessary for the public to know the hex code. And because there's no physical hardware fix to ADS-B, there's no like sort of cryptographic solution. There's no twist of two keys, perhaps like say NAV Canada, FAA, and other global ANSPs have some kind of unique access. Because that isn't possible right now, we need to find a way that assures those operators, perhaps it's the RCMP, perhaps it's the Air Force flying the Prime Minister, and perhaps it's a corporation in Canada that for both safety and privacy reasons doesn't want members of the public to just easily look them up and track them. So let's find a solution. Going forward and more on this point, I want to raise the idea of flight and duty time. Now, again, when you think of managing expectations, if you're somebody that's running a pure play 604, so you're in that middle category and third, so you're a corporate operator, you're individually owned and flown, you're typically just running a straight 604 operation. As a result, the recent flight and duty time regulations that went into force doesn't apply to you. Now, people ask, well, how did 604 get exempt? 604 has had a safety management system program for a very long time. In fact, even before 705, before the airlines. So 604 and the CBAA's work and efforts on that have been around for a long time. So in the case of a 604 operator, if you had a fatigue issue, you would have identified it already in your safety management system. You would put in some mitigations to reduce then the risk associated with that fatigue. If, however, you are a 703 or 704 operator, the rules of the flight and duty time won't work. And why? Well, there are two paths. There's the prescriptive path, that is to say, the regulations that identify when did you and your crew report for duty, how long is the segment, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's the FRMS, the Fatigue Risk Management System. And the reality is that the FRMS, very simply, does not work for unscheduled commercial operations. Now, what the association is undertaking with two of its members right now is a pilot project with Transport Canada, the operator members, and CBAA to find a realistic program or a path forward, an alternate means of compliance, let's say, for FRMS. Something that still takes in risk assessment, something that looks at what were your crews doing before, what are they planning to do right now, and what are the risks associated with that flight, and how if at all, can you mitigate responsibly the risk that's associated with fatigue in that operation in order to enable, where appropriate, trips to be flown? So in the end, our work on this red tape, I mean, there is so much that occupies our time that keeps us busy with both Transport Canada, with CBSA, various regulatory bodies and agencies that oversee business aviation, or at least have an influence on business aviation. But broadly, those are some of the buckets and how managing expectations is important. I hope you'll see that from the case of 703, 704, and 604, there are nuance. And what we are tasked with is to be your voice for business aviation in the places that you can't be. And this is why our partnership together really can help influence our support, our ability to educate, influence what happens to business aviation. Because very often, what it looks like if you go out on a loan is this: you're yelling at the phone, you're frustrated dealing with agencies as a group of one. You know, as large as your organization can be, it is difficult to be in some of these places. And ultimately, that's the value of that membership, your participation. Your participation in watching this video and in coming out to our chapter events. It's your commitment to this industry. And in the end, what I've taken to saying is that if we don't fight for this industry, the question is who will? We see that COVID has created a pretty unique opportunity. As I record this now, WestJet is preparing, say, a pilot strike. COVID and the recovery and commercial flights, the frequency, now more than ever, the time cost benefit analysis swings very much in favor of business aviation. These tools, and that's all that they really are for business, allows you to, in effect, have this time machine. And the calculation, the cost of your time, the cost of the airline tickets in comparison to the business aviation alternative means that now more than ever, our industry is solving the problems of travel, getting people to places safely, reliably, and efficiently. I'll close with just a reminder. The next opportunity for us to get together is through our convention. We've sold out the outdoor static space, so we've got a great representation. All the manufacturers are going to be there. Aircraft of various shapes and sizes will be there to check out. Our booth space, so you'll be able to connect with the associates. Again, those training providers, maintenance and repair facilities. The list goes on. The folks that want to connect with you, the operators. It's a great opportunity to connect with each other. You'll hear from, in the case of the airport authorities, what future plans they're having. You'll hear from the government leaders. You'll hear from industry experts about everything from the environment, the future of business aviation, the future of really what we can do together. So thanks for tuning in. I hope to see you both at the convention, at our fall chapter meetings, and don't hesitate to reach out to anyone on the team at CBAA. Your voice, your input, it's what makes us be more powerful, to tell your story in the places that you can't be. So thanks, everyone. Hope you're well.